Most people think they're pretty good at spotting a liar. You know, the usual stuff: avoiding eye contact, fidgeting, acting nervous. That's what we've all heard growing up. Someone looks away when they talk to you, they must be hiding something. Someone can't sit still, they're probably not telling the truth. It sounds reasonable on the surface, and honestly, it's what a lot of us were taught to believe. But here's the thing: people who are actually good at lying don't look like that. They look normal, they look calm, they hold eye contact, they speak clearly, and sometimes they're even more believable than someone who's actually telling the truth. The nervous, fidgety liar you're picturing, that's usually not who you need to worry about. The ones who are really good at it don't give you those signals at all. Niccolò Machiavelli figured this out a long time ago when he wrote The Prince. He wasn't really concerned with right and wrong. He was more interested in how people actually behave when something's at stake, when there's power to gain, a reputation to protect, or a situation to get out of. And one of his core ideas was pretty straightforward. People don't always say what's true, they say what works. So instead of watching for the obvious stuff, you start paying attention to patterns, the way someone tells a story, the way they answer or don't answer a question, the way their behavior lines up with what they're saying over time. That's where the real information is. Here are 11 signs someone might be lying to you. The first sign is when someone tells you exactly what you want to hear. And look, in the moment, it feels good. They agree with your take on something, they back up your thinking, they say all the right things at the right time. It's easy to walk away from that kind of conversation feeling validated, feeling like this person really gets you. But here's what's worth paying attention to. If you start to notice that this person never really pushes back on anything you say, never challenges your thinking, never says something that might land a little uncomfortable, that pattern is worth looking at more closely. Because in a real, honest relationship, whether that's a friendship, a work relationship, or anything else, disagreement happens. People have different views. They bring up things you might not have considered. When someone never does that, when everything is always agreement and validation, sometimes that's genuine, but sometimes it's a strategy. Sometimes it's someone who has figured out that keeping you comfortable is more useful to them than being straight with you. Machiavelli wrote a lot about how people maintain favor by saying what others want to hear. It's one of the oldest moves there is. And the reason it works so well is because it feels like honesty. It feels like connection. When someone agrees with you, your guard comes down. You trust them more. And that's exactly the point. The second sign shows up when their story sounds a little too clean. Think about the last time something genuinely complicated happened in your life. Maybe a conflict with someone, a situation at work, a misunderstanding that got out of hand. When you told someone about it, how did it come out? Probably a little messy, right? You maybe forgot what order things happened in, or you weren't sure about one detail, or you said something like, "I think it was Tuesday. Actually, no, it might have been Wednesday." That's how real stories come out. They're a little rough around the edges. People stumble over details, admit uncertainty, leave things a little open-ended because that's how life actually works. But when someone is lying, they often go the opposite direction without realizing it. They smooth everything out. Every part of the story connects perfectly. There are no loose ends, no missing pieces, no moments of, "I'm not totally sure about this part." The whole thing flows cleanly from start to finish. And here's why that matters. A story that sounds that polished usually means someone has gone over it in their head multiple times before saying it out loud. Real memories have gaps. Constructed ones tend to be filled in. So when a story sounds almost rehearsed, when it's a little too complete, that's worth noticing. The third sign is when they try to get ahead of the story before you can ask anything. This one is easy to miss because on the surface, it just looks like someone being upfront. Before you even have a chance to bring something up, they're already explaining. They jump in fast, volunteer information you didn't ask for, give you context and background and detail right out of the gate. It feels like openness. It feels like transparency. But sometimes what it actually is someone getting in front of a narrative before you have the chance to form your own. Think about it this way.
If you can shape how someone sees a situation before they start asking questions, their questions are going to come from a different place. They're going to be working off the version of events you gave them instead of coming at it fresh. And that makes the whole thing a lot easier to manage. Machiavelli was pretty direct about this. Control how people see a situation, and the actual facts become much less important. Most of what people believe isn't based on what happened, it's based on what they were told first. And someone who understands that will always try to be the first one talking.
The fourth sign is in the way they answer questions, or more accurately, the way they don't. You ask something simple, something that should have a pre-direct answer, and instead of just answering it, they start going around it. There's a lot of background information, a lot of context you didn't ask for, a lot of side details that stretch the response out longer than it needs to be. And by the time they're done talking, you kind of have to stop and think, wait, did they actually answer what I asked? Most of the time, they didn't. And this is different from someone who just talks a lot or who gives thorough answers out of habit. The difference is that when you ask again, or when you try to bring it back to the original question, the same thing happens. More circling, more filling of space, more anything except a straight answer. That's not confusion, that's a deliberate move, because a direct question answered directly is a moment of accountability, and when someone wants to avoid accountability, they avoid the answer. The fifth sign is something a lot of people don't think about. They mix real details into the lie. Most people picture lying as making things up completely, whole stories invented from nothing. But that's actually not how it usually works, and it's definitely not how it works when someone is good at it. The most convincing lies are built around true things, real names, real places, real events that actually happened, just rearranged or framed in a way that leads you somewhere false. Because when you hear details you recognize, details you know to be accurate, your brain extends that credibility to the rest of the story. If this part is true, the whole thing is probably true. Machiavelli understood this clearly. He wrote about how deception is most effective when it looks nothing like deception, when it's wrapped in enough truth that it barely registers as a lie at all. The goal isn't to create something entirely false, it's to point something real in a direction that serves you. That's what makes this one hard to catch. You're not looking for something that sounds fake, you're looking for something that sounds real, but leads you somewhere it shouldn't. The sixth sign is one of the more reliable ones over time, when their actions don't match what they say. Words are easy, anyone can say the right thing, but behavior over time is a lot harder to fake consistently, and that's where the truth tends to show up. They say one thing and do another, and whenever you bring it up or notice it, there's always a reason. Something came up, the situation changed, you misunderstood what they meant. And each individual explanation might sound reasonable enough on its own. But when you step back and look at the full picture, when you stop evaluating each excuse individually and start looking at the pattern, it stops adding up. The words keep pointing one way, and the behavior keeps going somewhere else. Machiavelli made the point that most people judge based on what they see and hear in the moment, not on patterns over time. And someone who understands that will put almost all of their energy into sounding right, into saying the right thing, framing things the right way, making sure the surface looks clean, because they're betting that most people won't zoom out far enough to see the inconsistency underneath. The seventh sign is when they quietly shift the blame. And this one is subtle, which is exactly why it tends to work. It's not the obvious kind of blame shifting where someone points a finger or gets defensive. It's a lot smoother than that. They reframe things. They describe a situation in a way where, somewhere in the explanation, responsibility gradually moves away from them. Maybe it ends up on another person, maybe on bad timing, maybe on circumstances that were out of anyone's control. But by the end of it, they're not really at fault for anything. And if you weren't paying close attention, you might not even catch it, because it didn't happen loudly. It happened in the middle of a regular-sounding explanation. That's the whole point. It's designed not to be noticed.
The eighth sign is one of the more reliable ones over time, when they stay unusually calm. In a situation where most people would at least show a little discomfort, a little pressure, a little unease, they're completely steady. No hesitation, no shift in body language, no visible stress. And most people read that as confidence, as someone who has nothing to hide, because why would an innocent person be stressed out? But that's not always what it is. Sometimes that calmness comes from preparation, from having thought through the conversation beforehand, from knowing exactly what they're going to say and how they're going to say it. Nervousness usually comes from uncertainty, from not knowing how things are going to go. When someone has already worked out every angle, there's not much left to be nervous about. Machiavelli talked about composure as a tool. Staying calm isn't just a personality trait, it can be something you use to project a version of yourself that other people are less likely to question. The ninth sign is when they over-explain the small stuff. Details that don't really matter in the bigger picture somehow get a lot of airtime. They go deeper than necessary, layer things in, add specifics that aren't really relevant to anything. On one level, it can come across like thoroughness, like someone who just wants to make sure you have the full picture. But there's an important difference between explaining something and convincing someone. Explaining is just transferring information. Convincing is making sure the other person believes you. And when someone is spending a lot of energy on details that have no real bearing on anything, that extra effort is usually serving a purpose. They're not giving you more information because you need it. They're giving it to you because it makes the story feel more real. More real, the less likely you are to question it. The 10th sign is that they're watching you while they talk. Not in an obvious way, but you can pick up on it if you're paying attention. They're not just focused on what they're saying, they're tracking how you're receiving it, your expression, your body language, whether you seem to be following along or whether something looks off to you. And based on what they're picking up, they adjust. They might add more detail to something if you seem uncertain. They might move past something quickly if it looks like you're accepting it without question. The tone might shift slightly. The emphasis might change. It's not really a conversation at that point. It's more of a feedback loop. They're running the story and reading your reaction to it in real time, then using what they see to keep it going in the direction they need it to go. And the 11th sign is the one that most people tend to dismiss, that quiet feeling that something isn't quite right. There's no clear proof, no obvious contradiction you can point to, but something about the situation just doesn't sit right with you. You can't fully explain it, but you feel it. A lot of people push that feeling aside. They tell themselves they're overthinking it, or they don't want to seem paranoid, or they want to believe what they're being told because it's easier. And sometimes those things are true. But Machiavelli made the point that people often override their own instincts because they want the simple version of things. They want to take what they're hearing at face value. And that tendency, that desire for things to be straightforward, is something that can be taken advantage of. That feeling usually isn't random. It's your brain picking up on inconsistencies before you've consciously processed them. Small things that didn't line up, a detail that didn't quite fit, a tone that was slightly off. It might take a little time to figure out exactly what triggered it, but the feeling itself is usually telling you something. At the end of the day, Machiavelli wasn't arguing that everyone is out here lying all the time. His point was simpler than that. People act based on what's in their interest, and sometimes when the stakes are high enough, that includes not being fully honest. So the takeaway isn't to walk around suspicious of everyone you talk to. That's not a useful way to live, and it's not what any of this is about. The takeaway is just to pay attention. Watch how people's stories hold up over time. Notice whether behavior actually matches what's being said. Look at patterns, not just individual moments. And when something feels off, don't be so quick to talk yourself out of it. Because most of the time, the truth isn't buried, it's just not being said out loud. And if you know what to look for, you usually don't have to look that hard. If you found this useful, go ahead and subscribe. That's really all there is to it. We put out videos that get into human behavior, psychology, and the kind of thinking that actually helps you understand people better. Not in a complicated way, just straight practical breakdowns of why people do what they do and how to navigate it. No filler, no fluff, just content that's actually worth your time. If that sounds like something you'd want more of, the subscribe button's right there. Takes about 2 seconds. And if there's a specific topic you want us to cover, something about behavior, influence, relationships, decision-making, drop it in the comments. We do pay attention to those. Either way, see you in the next video.